Okay, so welcome to today's session in which we're focusing on preparing a winning bid. My name's Laura Hill and I'm Project Manager for the Innovation Grant Mentoring Programme. The Innovation Grant Mentoring Programme provides business support funded by Norfolk, Suffolk and Essex County Councils. And our aim is to increase awareness to innovative businesses in the region around research and development funding. We offer bespoke, fully funded innovation mentoring and bid writing coaching towards funding calls, which I'll talk to you all about later. Please note that today's session is being recorded and we will be sending out the link to the recording to everyone's that registered after the session. So let's start by going through the agenda for today. Okay, so in terms of the agenda, we've got David Kaye, one of our key mentors on the programme Innovation Mentors, and he'll be talking through preparing a bid for success and delivering our key talk for today. Following this, I'll talk to you about the Innovation Grant Mentoring Programme and the support we can offer and how we can assist you as you're thinking about preparing for innovation funding. If you have any questions throughout the webinar today, please do add them to the Q&A bar or the chat bar, and we'll be answering these at the end of the session. We've got a Q&A element to the end of the session, sort of around the back end of the webinar, so we'll pick those up then. I've also got two of our team members, Jade and Helen, supporting the event today, so they'll be able to answer any quick questions in the chat bar, Q&A bar, so they will come back to you if you've got any questions there. We'll be sharing the slides at the end of the session, and you know, as I mentioned, do put those questions into the Q&A bar. Okay, right, so I'd like to introduce you to David Kaye, one of our innovation mentors on the programme. David has worked with us on the programme for a number of years and delivered some fantastic advice and supported businesses with great success towards innovation funding calls. So I will stop sharing my presentation and allow David to bring in his presentation.
Thank you, Laura. You're too kind. Just share now.
And as David's sharing his presentation, we have a couple of polls we'd like to put forward to everybody on the webinar today. Helen, could you launch those polls, please? Okay, so the first poll is, have you ever applied for innovation funding? And then we've got, if you've applied for innovation funding, were you successful? It's really helpful to allow us to understand sort of who's in the webinar today and how we might be able to support you. That's great to see. David, can you see the response to the polls, or should I talk through those?
I cannot actually. I was just looking for that. Sorry.
That's all right. I know it's a bit temperamental. Sometimes it's obvious to all, and sometimes it's not. So actually, we've got a 50-50 response. So 50% of the attendees in the session.
Oh yes,
53 are saying yes, they've applied for innovation funding, with 47% no at the moment.
Mm. And the majority of people were not successful with their applications as well. So,
but not by much. So 54%, so 46% were successful. So that's great. You know, it's great to hear.
Very good. Very good. Well, Thank you for that. Very useful. And with that, Laura, shall I take it away?
Yes, no, please do, David.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you very much. So, good afternoon, everyone. We're going to talk to you today about how to prepare your bid for success. It's a continual learning process, and everybody's got their own methodology. So we'll cover some of the sort of the fundamentals, and then we will talk a little bit how I think about them, which can, even if you have been successful, it's always good to sharpen the saw. Go. So this is just a bit of an outline about what we're going to do today. You know, what is it? What are the benefits and impacts? The different types, how to select a competition, which is really important, and of course, how to prepare your bid. We'll also doff our cap to the use of AI at the end, which I know a lot of people want to talk about. So very quickly about me, as Laura said, I'm one of the mentors on the program. Really enjoy working with businesses in the region. It's a pleasure to see what everybody's working on. I'm a freelance grant writer and innovation advisor. I've been an operator in mostly clean energy, to be honest, so sustainable ventures, Highview Power, where I learnt to write innovation grant funding proposals. So I've been writing them for about 12 years, have achieved and secured about £6 million in total, with the biggest one worth just under 2 million for Highview Power. Crucially, I've also managed some of these projects as well, about 1.5 million, which is really important because you need to know, you know, how to actually deliver a good project as well as write a good proposal. So the basics. What is innovation funding? So apologies to anyone that knows this, but as I say, it's always good to sharpen the saw, because the way you think about it is really important, how you write and how you design your project. So it's always good to remember that they are taxpayer funded. So it's public money. You have a responsibility for value for money when you are proposing and also when you are delivering the project. They are competitively awarded, which is super important. I know the first few times this doesn't always doesn't come across to everyone, but these are very competitive, sometimes hyper competitive. So you always need to be thinking about what is the best answer, what is the best project for this competition. The purpose of them, which we'll dive into in more detail later, but the sort of high level answer is that these grant funding competitions are there to incentivize innovation by helping to mitigate technical risk for companies that are pursuing this innovation, pursuing this R&D. So it obviously costs money to do R&D, and if you have an uncertain return on that R&D, you know, it dissuades you from making that investment. So by reducing the cost, it kind of helps to mitigate that risk somewhat. It's important to remember that there are defined pots of funding that are limited in size, both the total pot of funding and also the size of the project. These are projects in the future that we're talking about as well, and they're always time limited. That's really important, because if you start too early or you finish too late, you know, it cannot be it can be ineligible. And they're usually mostly innovation funding is in the form of a cash grant, and we'll talk about some of the different types, but it's important to remember that for the cash grants, they are almost always paid in arrears. So you'll do a quarter's worth of work and then you will invoice the funding body for that money. And typically, this is important to remember, it's a sliding scale about how much of a grant that you will get compared to the project cost. So we're talking about for small businesses at an early stage, it'll be 70%, but then that grant funding intensity decreases with the sort of size of the business. So corporates only get 50% for early stage research, and also the how close to market you are as well. We'll cover that later. But just to sort of cover this off finally, these are for businesses. So if you're thinking about NGO, if you're an NGO looking for funding, or you're looking for philanthropic funding, or you're an academic, just check that you are in scope, because this is primarily funded at businesses and organizations that work with businesses. So what are the benefits and impacts? Well, from a business perspective, because it's a cash grant, it's not an investment and it's not debt. So you don't have this, you're not selling shares, so you don't dilute your shareholders. And because it's not debt, the cash grants are not debt, you do not have to put up collateral or make repayments. Because it's also not a sale, you are not selling a product to the government for most innovation funding competitions. So you don't have to sort of package up your product as service. What you are delivering is IP progress. So progress on moving your business forward. And we'll talk about that a bit later, but that's all really these are all great because it's an excellent source of funding to bring into the mix that has a different set of obligations. Now, as we mentioned earlier, by decreasing the cost of R&D, what that helps to do is de-risk it because there's less at stake, so to speak, by receiving the grant funding. And finally, it's really important to remember that because these can be quite hard to win, there is a sort of a prestige effect that where you end up by winning these awards, you can signal to the world that you know what you're doing, you're able to write a good bid, put a good team together, your technology and service is promising, and therefore you signal to investors, to clients, to staff, to suppliers, all sorts of organizations. If you've won one of these, you're a company to watch, basically. Now, I really want to reiterate to people that it's not free money, because there can be this idea that, oh, we ask for as much as we can get, it doesn't matter, it's free, we do what we want with it. No, you have obligations when you take this, and it's worth talking about those. Because they link to what you have to deliver for the government. So the benefits and impacts for innovation funding from the government's perspective is that you're helping the government to achieve its objectives. So the government sets out strategic policy. All governments set out strategic policy goals. And these policy goals are there because they want to increase the competitiveness, security, resilience, basically the success of their country, right? How does this translate to what we're doing? Well, they want you to create jobs. They want you to develop new capability. They want you essentially to make money in the future, not necessarily during the projects, but in the future. They want these products that you are investing in and developing, partly with their grant funding assistance. They want you to be able to make revenue in the future and increase the future tax that you pay to them. Okay, because the cynic's view is that they make these grants to achieve tax revenues in the future, and that's not that's not completely far off the mark, but it's related to competitiveness, security, and resilience. So essentially, you can think of that you are being paid by the government to submit a plan, deliver on the plan, and then submit your monitoring documents so that they can actually, so that they can actually see that you are delivering what you said you'd deliver. And then the funding body, be that Innovate UK or whoever, will come onto those later. They can report to their ministers, they can report to the government and actually say, look, these are the indicators that we are helping to achieve potentially in the future with this project. So I always think of the government or the funding body as a client in a way. Now, when we talk about the sort of the priorities of the government, usually each competition that you bid into will have a link to a policy document, but you can see here in particular, these are some of the ones from the industrial strategy that we have at the moment, the modern industrial strategy. So these are the key areas that you will see competitions being issued in and addressing directly. Whenever you talk about your organization, your innovation, you want to be linking back to these. And if you can go into the documents and find the specific goals for the outcomes they want to see, and then link your potential outcomes to these, that's key to a winning bid. But how do we frame it to them and to ourselves? Well, the key is it's like any essentially a grant funding proposal is like any sales document. You want to highlight the gap between the sort of the problems of where we are today and the glorious promised land of the future if we could just get there. So we can think, if we use this image, we can think about actually that our technology, our service is like a bridge that we have designed. We're the only people that can build this bridge. We've got all that, we know where the materials are going to be, we know how we're going to test it. The only thing that's missing is we need some help with the money. Okay, and that's one of the main ways that you can talk about your innovation and your plan in the bid. Now, the next level up from this is kind of like the entry level. The next level up is where we start to think about chain reaction. So some of you may have seen this meme, and I can't find the original file, so apologies, it's a bit pixelated. But essentially, we can think about a chain reaction that you are going to cause in your business for good. So lots of positive impacts that you are going to create in the world, if only you had the help of a funding body. In this case, for example, Innovate UK, who are going to help you by contributing some initial input in the form of beautiful money. And what change is that going to have? Well, it's going to kickstart your project. Your project is then going to transform your company. Your company is then able to support your customers. Your customers are then going to change the market that they operate in, and the market is going to have whatever impact it will have on the economy as a whole. Now, the crucial thing to think about here and to remember when you write your proposal is it's not the money end of the equation that Innovate UK and the other bodies are super interested in. It's the big end. It's the big domino that's going to fall over here at the end. So when we talk about what the impacts of this project are going to be in the proposal, you are wanting to communicate what are the economic impacts. So it's not just the impacts on your customers or your company. What is the transformative impact that will happen? Okay, so you help, let's say you're building something for farmers, okay, farmers to look after the soil. What are the impacts going to be on the farmers? Well, if they've got better soil, are they going to need to use less fertilizer and pesticides? So it reduces the cost of inputs, okay? Reduces the cost of inputs, also helps them to achieve greater output so they can sell more crops. So that changes the market. But then also, what's the impacts on the economy? If food is cheaper, does that help households? Does that, if there's less fertilizer and pesticides, does it improve the environment? I suppose it should be economy/environment, really, shouldn't it? But it's the wider economic impacts and environmental impacts. So those outcomes at the sort of the large scale are really important. Now, let's talk about innovation funding types very briefly. There are three main types to talk about. The first one, the simplest one, is often smaller competitions may be just non-financial support. So what does that mean? There might be some support with investment readiness. There might be some mentoring opportunities, network opportunities. Sometimes you can get a small grant to go to Europe to network with people who want to write an Horizon Europe bid, or go on a trade mission, for example. Sometimes you can get grant funding, small amounts to help to do an IP audit. These can be very small grants, but actually, or innovation funding opportunities, should I say. But sometimes these are blended in with other opportunities as well. So they are a component part of a bigger program, which we'll mention in a minute. The next one is debt. So there are certain innovation funding debt schemes. So for example, Innovate UK has something called an innovation loan. DASA, which is called Innovation UK Defence Innovation now, I believe, that used to do something called a defence loan. So these are below market rates and they have friendly repayment terms. But be warned, they are still debt and they will still come and close your business down if you don't make repayments, unfortunately. So it's to be, it's friendly debt, but it's still debt. The good thing is many companies are not, there are a lot of companies that are early stage not even eligible for these because they're not making revenue yet. So it's one to be aware of, but probably not deploy. The one that's most common and our focus today is, of course, the grant funding opportunities that we've sort of talked about mostly already. Sometimes they can have non-financial support blended in. For example, the Women in Innovation Award is a classic one that comes with a package of non-financial support. When you have non-financial support in a grant funding competition, during your bid, you should not just talk about how you're going to use the money, you should also talk about the non-financial support, because it's there for a reason. They're clearly spotted, when they've designed the program, they've clearly spotted some sort of problem in the markets, problem in the innovation ecosystem. So you need to reference this to actually say that you're going to deploy it effectively. Okay, on the topic of innovation funding types, we can start to look at some of the funding bodies. So Innovate UK is probably the most famous one that you would have heard of in the UK. They list their competitions on the Innovation Funding Service portal, which is you can see on the right-hand side here. Increasingly, they start to list competitions directly from other departments. So DEFRA are advertising are running their competitions through this a lot more. You've got things like the Farming Innovation Programme that's here, which is funded by DEFRA. More and more we see competitions that are going through here. Be warned, they have also started advertising grant funding competitions for ecosystem hubs. So not necessarily end beneficiaries that are companies, but when they want an ecosystem hub to run a competition or a program, they will launch it through here. So we'll go through, but always check the guidance. So it's worth knowing about. Okay, if you're in the space industry, and defense and security, there are a few good ones to talk about here. European Space Agency, we are an associated country for that, so we make payments into the big pot and we're eligible to bid. This is a really good one. The success rate is not terrible, it's quite favorable. They are very detailed applications, but as a result, you get a lot of value when you do a detailed application because it allows you to really be rigorous in your thinking. So I would recommend anybody that's involved in sort of geospatial or space-based or connectivity to look at ESA. Of course, you've also got the UK Space Agency and what used to be called DASA, which is now called UK Defence Innovation. So they are very worth checking out as well, for reasons that I'll talk about later when we talk about how to pick opportunities. Other ones in Europe where we are still eligible, there's something called the EIC Accelerator from the European Innovation Council. For full disclosure, I am what's called a business coach on this program. So I don't write grants for this. I help people to, when they've got through step one with the EOI, I give them free coaching during their development of the main proposal. But I would say, beware if you go for this one. This is for TRL 5 and above, so someone who's already done a good level of prototyping. So early stage is not even eligible. It's also very hard to win. So the step 2 proposal takes probably about 2 months to write, and it has a 96% failure rate. So obviously, when you're going through filtering, you need to think about, do you want to run that risk? It's part of a sort of a wider umbrella under the Horizon Europe, which is the sort of the EU's grant funding program. There are lots of other different opportunities in there. I'm not an expert on them because, quite frankly, I think they're very difficult to win. They're also challenging for early stage startups to lead. They tend to be very cumbersome to write and quite difficult to deliver as well in terms of all the monitoring requirements. That being said, there's huge pots of money. If you are an organization that's going to be collaborating with businesses across Europe and maybe even further afield, it can be worth checking out, especially if you have a very niche requirement or you're in a very capex heavy field, because they can help to de-risk future investment. There are some really niche ones that are good, like Eurostars. You do still need to have 2 or 3 collaborators in other countries, and it's only about 300,000 euros, I think 330, something like that, but it is a lot more winnable. So that is potentially one to check out if relevant. But again, if you're not planning to collaborate with overseas organizations, it's better not to find a grant and then go looking for partners, in my opinion. But that comes to the question that we'll talk about later. Right, and finally we have some other niche types that are worth talking about. I'll just grab a glass of water. The UK in particular will fund certain institutes to deploy grant funding on its behalf. So a really good one is the Henry Royce Institute, which I think is in Manchester. I've not had the pleasure of going, but this is around materials, advanced materials and innovation, and they do some really good stuff around connecting academics and business. So if you're in the advanced materials space, check them out. And there's another one which something called the Digital Dairy Chain, which is in Scotland. I believe it's managed by the SRUC in Scotland. That's more around, as you can imagine, dairy and modernising the dairy industry. You also have some others. So STFC is a government chain of government labs. They have an AI and sort of advanced computing wing. They typically have helped SMEs with data related and AI related stuff. Their competition is currently pending for the next round at the moment, but that might be worth keeping an eye on if you need some help with some really niche stuff. There's also something called Bridge AI, which I think is on pause at the moment, but again, it's like innovation vouchers for companies, operating companies that could really use a bit of help to explore an AI related idea. Also, you have these kind of quasi government entities called catapults, such as the Energy Systems Catapult. They, in the part, and the Advanced Manufacturing Research Catapult as well, they sometimes have little pots of funding where they can give you essentially days of expert time. So I wouldn't spend too much time looking at them, but if something comes up, it's worth, if you have a connection to a catapult, it's worth getting on their radar so that if an opportunity comes up, you can get involved. So there's obviously lots of disparate places to get funding. Something that can be worth having a look at is Innovate UK's KTN. So they have an opportunities portal, and essentially it aggregates from multiple government departments and also some corporate opportunities as well, and some of these kind of clusters and things. So it's like a big net for opportunities. So I would advise you to check it periodically, because sometimes you see something really quite that you wouldn't spot otherwise, really quite niche. So once you've spotted one, how do you select the best one for your project? So the first key point, and probably if there's only one thing to take away from this whole webinar, I would say make sure you read all of the competition guidance, because there's nothing worse than writing an application, submitting it, and then find out your bid is ineligible because you missed something that was in the guidance. It happened to me early in my career once, and it's this awful feeling. As a result, read all the competition guidance, make notes of what you need for eligibility and scope. Look for fatal flaws, look for things where you absolutely couldn't do it, and therefore you would be ineligible. For example, if you're a farming dairy-based business and they want something space related, if you've got nothing space related on your roadmap, don't bid. Or it's only for businesses that are based in Scotland and you've got no intention of being in Scotland, you're very happy in East Anglia, you're not opening another office, then ignore it. I always advise, once you've read the competition guidance, before you do any other research, formulate a project concept before you do the no-go and do any more research. What does that look like? This is not a document. This is, maybe you can put some notes on a paper, but essentially it's it's like a handful of bullet points, one or two, maybe three bullet points for each of the following. Your main objective. What is the main thing you want to achieve on this project if you were to win it? What are the 2 or 3 key activities you're going to do? And therefore, what are the 1, 2, 3 key deliverables that you're going to result in? Who are the key stakeholders? So if you need partners, if you need collaborators, who could they be? Who would your key customers be? If you need to do a trial, where would you do that? So just a handful of bullets on that one. And then finger in the air, rough order of magnitude costs. Because if you're too small or way too big, that can also be really helpful. And this is really important because this is deeply related to the concept of matching what you want to do with the funding and what the government wants to achieve with the funding. Really, you want that overlap to be a perfect circle, that Venn diagram. It not always is. So it's really important you go through this project concept formulation stage and actually understand how aligned are you with the government's needs here. And I always say that you formulate the concept to win, and then you write the bid not to lose. Um, because really, writing the bid is just making sure you say the right things. But if you haven't got the right things to say, then it's kind of meaningless, really. So once you've done the kind of the concepts and you've read the guidance, then you can start to sort of dig into things like eligibility. So what sort of business entities are needed? You know, are you the right, are you in the right financial situation? You know, will you need to raise money if you need lots of match funding, the 30 to 55% match funding, depending on the competition? You know, are there any other project details? Does it need to be a single bidder or can you be in a consortium? Single bidder is always preferable because you're in control of your own destiny. You write the project and deliver the project yourself. Doesn't necessarily mean you can't have subcontractors to help you deliver the work. But when you're in a consortium, you have kind of like a joint legal responsibility for the project. So it can be very cumbersome, especially if you're an early stage startup learning about these things. It can be very cumbersome to do that for the first time. Then we need to think about, you know, do we have an appropriate level of technical risk? Um, if you are doing something that's been done 1,000 times before, some form of web page, you know, something where you could code it in a weekend, grant funding is probably not an appropriate level of technical risk to get a subsidy, and you're not going to score well because you know you don't need grant funding. And I would say you don't really want to be waiting 6 months to get grant funding if you're doing something really quick and nimble anyway. So it's worth thinking about that. Also, an appropriate level of ambition to grow. You might have a good level of technical risk in your project, doing something that's going to take some R&D, but do you actually have the desire and inclination to grow a business that's going to employ people, get revenue, you know, scale massively, maybe even export, hopefully export, and pay lots of tax? If there's more of a hobby for you or an academic curiosity with no real sort of desire to grow a business, again, that's going to come through in the application, then you probably shouldn't bid. Finally, you know, how likely is it that it's going to be a commercially viable and sort of customer desirable product or service? So that is something to bear in mind. And ideally, in your proposal, you will always show that you've done a bit of research to test the market and get some evidence of traction, because assessors can spot a mile off if you haven't. So once you've done those things, you can start to think, you can do a probability assessment. So you can think about how aligned you are, how aligned is your project concept to the scope. So they set out the scope of what they want bidders to achieve with their projects. Realistically, how close are you and how competitive are you? You know, because there will be lots of bidders to these competitions. If you are a maybe, it probably means you're a no. If you're a hell yes, then you should consider bidding. If you're unsure, because of course the first few times it can always be a little bit challenging to work that out and to know that, look at previous winners. Look online for who's won the competition before. Read the project summaries. Were they kind of similar technologies, similar companies, you know, attacking similar problems, similar stage? Always very helpful. You can email, in many cases, the funder. So Innovate UK, you can reach out to them directly. Sometimes there are, I forget the name of them because I tend not to use them because I'm a professional grant writer, but sometimes there are sort of Innovate UK advisors, that growth funding advisors that you can speak to. They can help you check that you're aligned with the scope, and you know, they can basically just sort of help sense check. I always say a little bit of a word of caution here, because these people are not going to be assessing the project. Assessors of these grant funding competitions are actually third party experts. They might be academics, they might be grant writers, they might be experts in the field. These people are paid in their spare time to mark the assessments. So they are not necessarily privy and maybe don't share the same interpretation of the scope that you've checked with the funder or the growth advisor. But it can be really worth doing. If you've really got no idea, it can be really worth just sort of getting a sense check. Something else to consider is what I clumsily call the scope width. So how broad is the scope? What do I mean by that? There used to be a competition in the UK called the Smart Grants for the whole nation. There is a version in Scotland still, but we will ignore that. There used to be one for the whole nation where basically any innovative technology could apply. That was great because anybody could apply. It means you didn't have to worry about restrictions, but so much. But the challenge is that then everybody applied. It became very competitive and really hard to win. If you have an industrial technical niche competition, for example, a competition that's solely on agritech, instead of every innovative business, it's only agritech businesses that can apply. So it reduces the amount of competition, which is great. You can also have geographically constrained, so Scottish only competitions, East Anglia only competitions. These, when you see these, what that means is that allows you to know that the competition is smaller as well, because there's only so many companies that are going to be operating in East Anglia. The dream is when you have both of these. So the government occasionally runs something called the Agritech Launchpad in East Anglia. If you're an agritech company in East Anglia, it's wonderful because you know it's going to be a really small competition pool, so you can have a much higher chance of winning. And using all of these, you can also work out in addition to all of these, you can also work out what I call the raw odds of winning. So as I said, every competition has a defined pot. So you can see this one on the right has a pot of £2.5 million. That means there will be a number of awards they make from that £2.5 million, and they can't increase that. That's what the government has allocated to the funding body for that competition. Now you take the pot size and you look at what's the range of award sizes. So if it's the awards are going to be 250k grant maximum, you know the sort of the minimum number of grants they're going to make on this competition is 10. Okay, and if it's 125 to 250, you know the maximum number that they will make is going to be 20. So 10 to 20. Then you think, okay, how broad is the scope? I think they're going to get this many applicants. That's my raw chances of winning. Innovate UK have started to give you an indication of the raw chances of winning rather than making everybody go and look these numbers up. But it's always good to sort of do that sense check if you can. And finally, an influencing thing on your probability is, have you ever written an RFP before, a proposal, a grant funding application? And do you have the bandwidth? If not, if you don't have sufficient skill, great. I presume that's why you're here, because you're going to get support from the program that we're talking about today. Everybody always needs a bit of support as well. So it's always like you're sharpening the saw, you're leveling up, basically, in order to become more competitive. Bandwidth is a trickier problem, though. If you don't have bandwidth for a particular competition timeframe, you either outsource it or you no bid and you wait for one where you're less busy. So we need to think about now the types of projects. Basically, Innovate UK talk about three things. Firstly, a feasibility study is really self-explanatory. Early stage research on the feasibility, viability, and desirability of your opportunity. The main output at the end of a feasibility study is a proof of concept of some description, early stage TRL proof of concept, some form of financial model, some sort of technology roadmap for how you're going to get to the next stage. And crucially, you've interviewed customers and suppliers. The next step is what Innovate UK clumsily call industrial research, which most human beings would call product development. This is, you've assumed you've already done a feasibility study and you are now looking at, how do you develop the product further? The output is you're probably going to be doing similar activities, but the outputs are going to be a lot more mature. So you're probably going to have like a TRL 5 or 6 prototype rather than a proof of concept. So you've done much more work, it's much more developed. Perhaps it's a bigger scale from just a tabletop model. Maybe this is now in the workshop rather than just on a bench top. And then finally, you have experimental development, which most people would call like a pre-commercial demonstrator. So this is very close to market. The end outcome would be like a TRL7, a late stage demonstrator, and a roadmap for you to get to commercially operating version of whatever you want to build. Now, the first two of these for a startup would get 70% grant funding. The last one would get 45%. And it's slightly more confusing if you're a mid-scale or corporate company, but I don't think you would be on this call. So that's worth noting. So we haven't talked about what we can fund. And these are the typical categories. There are many things that you can't fund, so you have to look at the terms and conditions very carefully. And if you work with a mentor on this program, someone like me, I would be able to tell you because I've got detailed knowledge. Couple of things that are really important that you can't spend money on. Marketing. So, for example, trademarks are deemed as marketing. You can't use money for trademarks. And also, basic things like website design, ads, things like that, you can't use. You can still do what's called stakeholder consultation, so you can reach out to potential customers and interview them, but that's more to shape the scope and the roadmap of what you're trying to build. The other thing that's always catches people out is capital. So getting money for something that's going to last longer than the project period, you can't just get money for a big piece of capital equipment and install it and then it's there for 20 years. On most competitions, very rarely they'll run something like that. But usually what will happen is you can only claim the depreciation of that asset across the lifetime of the project. So it's very complicated. And this is all to do with the fact that they're not trying to do state aid directly into businesses. They're just trying to sort of de-risk R&D. Okay. So we now want to talk about how to prepare and submit a winning bid. So what you do is you end up building a proposal, usually through an online portal like IFS. It's like a mini business plan because it will talk to you. You will need to talk to them and provide information on, how your technology works, who's going to deliver it, what it's going to cost the customer when they buy it, how much they'll pay you, what the benefits are. It's a little bit more than that because you also need to provide a project-centric, fully costed work plan. This is really important because you will get us. These costs need to be the eligibility, need to conform to the eligibility that we saw on the previous slide. Also, you will be evaluated during the project that you're still keeping to your spending plan, and you will be evaluated at the end of the project as well. You can be audited basically to make sure that you've not spent it all on holidays and God knows what. You can change details that are in your bid depending on how deeply sort of relevant to how deeply integrated in the project they are. Depends on how difficult it is to change, but for trivial things you can change it, it's fine. For big changes it can be a lot more convoluted, so you have to do paperwork and things like that. So I would say always make sure that the bid reflects as close to what you want to build as possible, and then if you need to change it on a project, the changes are going to be minimal. This is what a typical grant funded project will look like. Obviously you can have more work packages, but the look and feel, the shape of the projects is this. You want a project management work package. I always put it as number one rather than at the end because you kick off at the beginning of the Gantt chart. Make sure it's less than 10% of the spend. Work package 2, a lot of the time people really just jump into the technology, but the thing is, it's good project management practice to always get good baselining at the beginning. So you want to interview your stakeholders, you want to revisit your design, have a design review, and identify your success criteria for the project. Then you're going to do some data collection, some design, preparation for the next work package, which is your build and test. And then the last work package, you're going to be trialing and validating whatever you've built. The fourth work package. There you want to show that you've achieved your success criteria for the project. So if you wanted to build something that's going to have a certain amount of performance, you want to show that you are on track to hit that performance. You also, in that work package, you want to validate it with customers and suppliers and other stakeholders, because the thing is about Innovate UK, they're mitigating technical risk, but it's not just technology. Every technology is being pulled out. Every good technology is being pulled out of its business by the customer, by the market. So if there's not that commercial pull there, firstly, it's not good for the assessor, but it's also terrible for your business, because you want your customers to be deeply involved in what you're developing, or at least you want their requirements to be deeply involved. And then finally, you have a work package to bring it all together. Talk to people about what you've done, make sure you've squared away all the learnings internally, but crucially you're planning for the future. So you have a technology roadmap, you protect any IP that you've developed, and you also have a commercialization roadmap. So how are you going to reach out to your customers, things like that. So we get into the business end of the presentation now. Remember, these are a competition. Every answer you give, if you're going to win, it has to be best in class. There's no 50-50 passes, there's no Hail Marys, there's no flip a coin. You've got to think, what does an outstanding answer look like? Okay. And if you can't get to that level, how can you get to that level? The key thing here is team. If you don't have a full team, you need to remember that the winners of these competitions are most likely going to have a full team that have worked together for years. So if you know you're going to need to hire someone and they're key to develop the project, can you find somebody and get them to agree to be in your bid and say, look, if we win this money, can we discuss hiring you or something like that? That's one way of getting around it. Okay. You don't need to give them an actual contract offer. Sometimes it's like, the fact that you're not just putting an empty question mark in the team slide, as it were, so to speak. The fact that you've got a real person there and you can build a bio, that is one way of sort of getting up to the level of quality to score well. Otherwise, you have to remember, when you're writing one of these bids, you're trying to influence the assessor. So you're trying to persuade them. What is persuasive? A vague answer or a specific answer? It's always a specific answer, because if it's vague, that leaves a gap in their mind. Maybe they don't know what they're talking about. Maybe they've done no research. Maybe it's impossible. So you always want to show specific answers to show that you know what you're talking about and to help them to size the opportunity or what you're talking about. So I've given some examples down here. If you're talking about you want to sell to farmers, who is it? If it's how many people work on farms in England? And also, can you put a source for that data point as well? That's really helpful. If you say, oh, we've got interest from the market, that is a meaningless sentence. If you want to say, well, we've had a letter of interest from Agri, who's the UK's largest agronomist, 40% of agricultural output in the UK is kind of from farmers that they advise. They're going to be one of our channel partners, and that could create an opportunity of £17.5 million revenue for us over the next 9-10 years. That's a much more persuasive answer. Okay. And also, when you set out a logical chain in your proposal, you don't want to half explain anything. You have to spoon feed the assessors to make sure they've understood the logical implications of what you say. Okay. Which is why at the end, you want to add the revenue opportunity. So it's not enough to say that we've got this potential partner. What is the revenue that this potential partner could bring to you? Okay. So, as I said, you want to minimize all risks except technical risks, because that will help you to do a best-in-class answer. When you talk about potential customers, name some that you've been speaking to, unless you have an NDA in place. Also, what's really great, not everybody does this, but I always do this, have a stakeholder panel who are going to sort of give you input in Work Package 2 and validate the output of Work Package 4. So customers, partners, suppliers, whatever a good stakeholder panel looks like for you, consider that being in there. You want to have a clear path to commercialization. So as I said, you need to make sure that you are developing something that you've got a clear route to commercialization. Map that out. What does that look like? Who are your beachhead customers in the next 3 years? Who are the ones that are absolutely crying out for your solution? Talk about them. How are you going to progress through the TRLs? What sort of organizations are going to invest in you? When are they going to invest in you? How much? What's your funding round going to be next year? Are you going to raise a £2 million Series A from, XYZ VCs in London? This level of path to commercialization is really important. And as well as the project outputs that we talked about, so having a proof of concept, having your technology roadmap, blah, 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 You also want to talk about the outcome impact. So if you remember the red rectangle on the domino slide earlier, what are the key outcomes outcome impacts that you are going to achieve for the government, for the nation, for the world? You know, we're going to save this many lives. We're going to help this many wartime veterans who are amputees to walk again. We're going to help save this amount of carbon. We're going to create, this is really crucial, we're going to, by year 10, we're going to create this many jobs. We are going to pay this much tax. And this is going to give the funding body XYZ% return on investment on the grant funding. So it's a really sort of quick and dirty calculation, but how much grant funding you've asked for, what is the amount of tax that you're going to pay cumulatively by Y10 if you develop this innovation, you can work out a really rough ROI. Okay, because if the answer is 0%, then obviously you're not gonna have a chance. So these are sort of the really key. You know, we're getting closer and closer to sort of pro level, but if you can get all of these done, you are in with a great chance of winning. Finally, use of AI, or more specifically, people mean LLMs, right? Large language models. Really crucial to remember that they can hallucinate. They are basically prediction engines. They are not truth oracles. They are prediction engines. They are trained on all of the human knowledge that they have been able to get their hands on legally or illegally from the internet, right? So they can make stuff up. So whenever you use like ChatGPT or the like, go and do some actual quick research just to check that the report they mentioned exists, or that the effect they've talked about exists. So double check. Also, it's key to remember they're not trained on winners. Lots of people might be tapping into ChatGPT. I'm writing an Innovate UK bid, blah, blah, blah. But they have not got the problem. They have not got the winners documentation to train from. So they are training from all the inputs that people are putting in. What does that mean? Well, most people lose. So actually they're trained on the losers. So if it gives you an answer that it says is good, how does it know? Because most people that it's talked to lose, right? So that's something to be keeping in mind. Also, anything that you put into ChatGPT is leaked potentially, and I'm not close to the security of it, so don't take my word for it. Do some research on the T's and C's. But it's very possible. You should not be putting any trade secrets, for example, into ChatGPT or Google or anything like that. So just remember you can leak IP. And then what can you use it for? I advise it to brainstorm causes, brainstorm potential stakeholders, customers, trialists, things like that. Use it as a sort of more detailed version of a search engine. Also data sources, if you need to go and find some data sources, but then also go and check them with a manual search. And finally, I don't do this, but I know some people do, you can put your answer in and you can check it against the mark scheme. Sometimes that can be really helpful because it can kind of essentially act as a coach and cover off any bases. But I don't like to put fully answered text into any form of LLM because then they've got that data to train from. So thank you very much for listening. I hope that was useful. We are 4 minutes short. So with that, I shall stop sharing and hand back to the team.
Thanks, David. That was it's great to hear. Lots of really fascinating, useful information there, I'm sure, for as people are approaching innovation funding or considering innovation funding for their business. I'm just going to reshare my presentation now. So just if you could bear with me for a moment. Okay. Right, that should be back on the screen now, I think. Just set that up. Great. Okay, so I'll now kick off with the overview to the Innovation Grant Mentoring Programme. So we're hosting the lunchtime learning session today. We host a number of webinars and workshops on the programme, and we also provide one-to-one business coaching in innovation funding, and that is by application. So I'll talk to you about the programme and the service that we provide, and then we'll take any questions both on the programme and also on David's key talk at the end of the session. So as I mentioned at the start of the session, for those that have joined in partway through, my name's Laura Hill, and I'm Innovation Mentoring Project Manager. I've secured innovation funding myself in the past. I've got a background working in food innovation, and I've secured an Innovate UK funding for a number of innovation funding projects looking at high level development in the food industry. And therefore, I really understand the benefits of innovation funding and how it can develop these types of projects and push this R&D forward within the business. I'm now really passionate to support businesses in the region on the path to secure innovation funding, working with businesses across all sectors and working up their innovation projects, potentially to secure innovation funding and manage this programme to deliver that. So the Innovation Grant Mentoring Programme is a programme which provides fully funded innovation support to businesses across Norfolk, Suffolk and Essex, and it's sponsored by Norfolk, Suffolk and Essex County Councils. It provides, as I mentioned, free business support. So if you have an innovative business idea and want to understand how to secure innovation funding for your business to accelerate that R&D project and its route to market, and importantly, you really would value working with our team of expert innovation mentors, such as David Kaye, who's delivered our talk today, or one of our bid writing coaches, then this is a programme that might be able to support you. So please do contact us and see how we can work with you, and we can discuss that individually with anyone that has any questions regarding the support in the programme and how it can work for them. So innovation funding is for researching and developing a new product, process or service. And our programme is all about supporting businesses applying for these types of grants from innovation funding streams such as Innovate UK or any other sector relevant innovation funding organisation. The grants go towards supporting innovative projects, and these types of grants, as David mentioned, can range from thousands to millions of pounds, which really enables businesses to accelerate their innovation and therefore their route to market. We know that bids into these competitions aren't easy. They're extremely competitive, and often the application forms to these are long and complex. And therefore our project's mission is all about increasing awareness. It's not always an easy path to navigate as a small business to succeed in innovation funding. So this programme is about supporting businesses in our region in Norfolk, Suffolk and Essex to hopefully enable the pathway to become a lot clearer, and will help you on that route to hopefully achieve innovation funding success. So what support do we offer on our programme to businesses? Well, the support we provide, the one-to-one support we provide is by application, and we can support through innovation mentoring and bid writing coaching from our team of experts. The team have all been successful in winning innovation funding, maybe writing and winning bids. They know what it takes to achieve a grant, and therefore we can connect you to their support, and it's absolutely free to businesses on our programme. There is an application process which we can talk you through for that. And the mentoring support we provide is in-depth training on how to analyse and write successful applications. And it will not only assist you with the project you're working on at the moment, but the idea of this programme is that we're coaching you. And therefore, in the future, without our support, you can go it alone and hopefully have further success in these types of funding calls. It will give you the confidence to approach the right funding calls for your business and hopefully have success. The support is really flexible, and we can work with you from the stage you're at now on the route to innovation funding success. If you're not quite ready, but have a fantastic golden idea, we can support you with the early stage concept support in our programme, which is delivered by our mentors, which can then lead on to working towards the right types of advising on the right type of innovation fund to focus on, and then bid writing coaching in that fund. As a programme, we also run innovation funding webinars such as today to give a general overview on a particular topic. So today we're obviously focusing on preparing for bid success. And we focus on different topics, general different topics, as well as focused funding calls as well. For example, last month we ran a webinar on the Women in Innovation Fund for which Innovate UK ran. We ran a webinar on this, focusing on this particular call and talking through all the steps in the application to support businesses that we're looking into apply to this particular fund. So we pinpoint particular funding calls and then also give a general overview on different topics, all related to innovation funding to upskill you. And also then talk about our programme and how we can deliver that more in-depth support as well to businesses. In terms of eligibility to our programme, we're really pleased to hear from any highly innovative business based within Norfolk, Suffolk or Essex, from any industry sector. Ideally, we'd connect you ahead of funding calls to enable us to onboard you onto our programme. There is an onboarding application and onboarding process. So if the funding call is closing in a couple of weeks' time, in reality, we're not going to be able to support you in that particular application. We are connecting with businesses ideally at the early stages. You're considering innovation funding for in the next year ahead and how it might support your business. Apply into us and we can give you that pre-support, and businesses that have that pre-support, therefore when the funding calls arise, are in a much better position for us to advise you on the right funding call to work on, but also you have everything ready to go. And when that funding call opens, and if it's only open for 3-4 weeks, they often are, you're in a great position to get on with that application quickly alongside your day-to-day in the business as well. As a business, as a programme, we're looking to engage with businesses, small businesses, SME businesses with less than 250 employees, and also a senior team open to external support. We are looking to engage with businesses at all stages of the innovation pathway. So whether you're new to innovation funding or a business that needs a bit more support on developing your proposal, or maybe a business that has previously applied into innovation grants but not had success, we've got ways to support you. You also might be a business that had succeeded in the past in a smaller Innovate UK grant, for example, but now looking towards those larger ones, so maybe from a £50,000-60,000 award, you're now looking towards an award in the hundreds of thousands, maybe up to a million, 2-3 million. We have ways to support you on translating your knowledge and making sure that you're in a position to go forward with those larger grants as well. We also work with businesses on EU funding and can advise there as well, which are often have funding pots in the higher area as well. So at whatever stage you're at, if you're an SME in the region, please do have a conversation with us, do reach out, and we're happy to discuss how we might be able to support your business. So I just thought I'd go through briefly one of the businesses that we've worked with on the programme. We've worked with a business called Senai based in Norfolk. They had previously won a small Innovate UK grant and were searching for further innovation funding. And through the programme, they heard of us and thought they'd reach out to see how we might be able to support them. They applied to the programme, and then we were able to assign them an innovation mentor and a bid writing coach. In that process, in discussions with their mentor, we discovered that Innovate UK were releasing a call on environmental monitoring, and we thought this was a great one that keyed into their area of innovation really, really well. We supported them on that application alongside the mentor and bid writing coach, and the business won a grant of £448,000 with 3 supporting partners on that particular project. And they're now working on, now just about coming to the end of that project, but this grant money has had huge benefits to the business. They've been able to explore integrating optical sensors with micro water samplers to identify chemicals within the waterways, and this is been able to develop the project in such a way that they wouldn't have been able to do at this scale and at this point in time without the support from Innovate UK and the grant they received. And if successful, this has potential to work to go into the environmental agency and to support improving the water quality in rivers across the UK. So enormous benefits, obviously, which we know is a particular problem at the moment. So this is the type of project that Innovate UK have supported, and we've worked with this business in the past in securing innovation funding. We're now working with the business to look to see what other grants they could potentially tap into as they're approaching the end of this particular call as well, this particular funding project as well. So we work closely and continue that relationship with the businesses that come onto the programme. So this programme, the Innovation Grant Mentoring Programme, we've run the programme now for 5 years, and we've engaged with some fantastic, extremely innovative businesses across the region, working in all sorts of innovative areas such as health tech, food industry, and also businesses within the creative sector as well. On the project, to date, we have worked with over 400 businesses that have registered to our webinars and workshops, gaining valuable information from our team of expert innovation mentors and bid writing coaches, and perhaps sort of being inspired to sort of progress forward with innovation funding. We've worked with over 80 businesses that have received the one-to-one innovation mentoring at various different stages and/or bid writing coaching from our team of experts. And from this, we've supported businesses with a total of £3.1 million of successful innovation funding in the region, which is great to see. And yeah, we've really enjoyed working with these businesses, hearing about all the fantastic innovative projects going on in the region. There's so much going on, and this project is all about supporting businesses and shining a light towards the potential for innovation funding into their business. So I think that just about concludes the overview on our programme. We'll now move forward into the Q&A part of the webinar today. So please do put any further questions you might have from David's talk or from the any questions you might have on the Innovation Grant Mentoring Programme into the chat bar or into the Q&A. Put them in there, but we'll pick up on the Q&A now. So I know my colleague Jade is going to help us with the Q&A section. So Jade, if you want to come into put your microphone on and join us, that would be great.
So the first question we've got, David, is directed for you. So during the innovation funding slides, you were talking about technical risk. So what is technical risk for those that kind of don't know too much about it?
Wonderful. Great question. So technical risk is just literally how likely is it that you're going to succeed when you do your R&D, when you work on developing this product? What do I mean? if you are going to develop a taxi ordering app, you're not the first person to have done that. We've got Uber, we've got Lyft, we've got Halo, I went to the Lake District the other day. There's a Lake District company that's got their own app now as well. So there's a low risk there because it's been done before, tried and tested. You can buy one off the shelf, you can get a white label. Okay. On the other side of the equation, nuclear fusion. People have been trying for decades to build a fusion reactor. There's a lot of technical risk. Nobody's done one. It's, the only thing that's happened, I think they've had positive energy output for like a millisecond, right? Because the plasma is a very technically challenging to get the plasma in a fusion reactor to be stable. Okay. And then also plasma, basically you're building a little star on Earth. So if you don't contain it properly, the walls melt. So you need and also they get pounded by radiation. So you need like strong magnetic fields. You need containment vessel that can sort of tolerate getting pounded by radiation and stuff like that. So that's like a very high technical risk. Okay, so basically it's how many people have done it before and how difficult is it? How likely is it that you're going to fail? So that's my definition of technical risk.
Thank you. Laura, have you got anything to add?
No, I don't think to that one. I think David's just about covered everything there. Thank you.
So the next question that we've had come through is, so you mentioned sort of ecosystem during your presentation, David. What's the definition of an ecosystem?
Okay, so that might have been an erroneous problem not to talk about. Basically, if you think about a catapult or a university or someone like that who is convening lots of different organizations and runs a program, a bit like Norfolk County Council and the other councils that are running this program. They're bringing startups together, they're deploying some government funding. That is the sort of ecosystem hub that I was talking about. Okay, so basically all that you don't need to worry about, I would say to anyone, whoever answered that question, don't worry about it. Basically, the solution is read the text in the guidance and see if you are the sort of organization that they want to hire to do the work. So, there's things in there. For example, there are opportunities live at the moment around, they want hubs that are going to teach robotic skills, or that are going to teach people to, local people to learn AI skills are some of the ones, in there. So it's not necessarily about doing R&D so much. It's more about transforming skills. It's a shame that they're putting them in Innovate UK was my only point, because I don't think they're relevant. But that problem is mitigated if you just make sure you read all the text in the guidance for each competition that you think is relevant for you. Check the eligibility to see you're an eligible organisation, and check the scope to see if what your work that you want to do is aligned with what they want to fund.
I think this is a question for the both of you, actually. So what is the overall chances of success?
I'll start by sort of talking about a couple of funds, if that's okay, David, and then I'll pass across to you. So yeah, innovation funding is very competitive, and Innovate UK, as David mentioned in his talk, have recently started detailing the chances of success in previous that they've seen from previous funding rounds of that particular call. So with the SMART grant, which is on pause at the moment, it is not available. It had very low chance of success of under 3%. The Biomedical Catalyst Fund, which Innovate UK run, that's normally an annual fund which comes about in the autumn. It was launched last October, November time, and they mentioned in there that fund previously had around 10% chance of success. Again, the Women in Innovation Fund with Women in Innovation Award, which opened at the end of last year and closed in February from Innovate UK. that it is an extremely competitive competition, amazing to sort of enter and succeed in if you can. The last year's, so 2024's funding round there, that had a very low chance of success. It was at around sort of 4%, I believe. So this year they tightened up the entry requirements. So, hopefully the right type of businesses in entering this round, which is just closed in February, beginning of February, into that one. And so therefore we probably will see a higher chance of success because not so many businesses will have entered into that one. David, do you have any more sort of detail around that chance of success with any particular funding calls?
No, I think you summed it up quite nicely. I mean, I would add nothing more than I sort of put in my presentation, really, other than, in the past, some of them can be really mega low, like 2 to 4%, but they're not good ones to go for, like the old smart grants, things like that. If you get a really good niche one and not many people apply, sometimes it can be up to 25%. It can be really that high. And obviously, if you're good at that's just your raw chances of success. If you're good at writing proposals, then it's higher than that. So, that's the calculating those odds is part of the art of winning as well.
It's rolling that dice, but if you have a really sound proposition, you've got to be in it to win it. So yeah, why not? Why not?
Even the weird thing is that even the competitions that have very low chances of success, someone is winning that money. So you're quite right. Sometimes if you've got a good chance, you do everything you can. At some point, you have to just roll the dice. And one thing is, if you do lose, it's to be expected at some point. So can you learn lessons? Does it teach you more about your program? Because sometimes you don't really think about the details, the intricacies, the barriers, the problems about your R&D program until you actually sit down and start writing a proposal. Because you actually, if you do a proposal that's got a work package, your grant, can't even speak English, your Gantt chart in it, so your project plan, that actually might be the first time you've actually thought sensibly about what you need to do. So that can be useful, but obviously you don't want to do too many of those.
No, we see that on our program. Sometimes it's the businesses going through that process with our bid writing coach. They're learning so much from that process, and it enables them to really critique that application to go forward. I think. And also a really important thing is that confidence going forward with that bid with confidence as well. So when you're writing it, it's not we hope to achieve this, we might from this be able to do this. It's we will have this. This is the result we will be achieving by getting that grant funding. It's that positivity and confidence. And if you've got a really sound bid, why not? Why not you? It has to be somebody, as David says. So yeah, why not apply? Roll that dice.
So linking on to that, I think there's a good question here in case like anybody doesn't know too many sort of like project management methodologies. And so David, this is probably more aimed at you, but it's how you've mentioned project plans need to include sections referring to project management, so Gantt charts, research and development, and evaluations. But for anyone who's on the call who isn't familiar with tools and frameworks related to these processes, what models would you recommend to include and use for funding applications?
Well, I think learning how to run a good project is absolutely essential if you're going to run a business, especially one that's innovating. So I'd say get reading. I did the project management professional qualification, which I think is really, really good. You learn so much if you do that, and you can self-teach on that, and you can do it doesn't cost a lot of money to do that, but the PMP I'd really recommend. The Innovate UK always ask for a Gantt chart or a project plan, and the challenge is that if you're a software project, for example, you almost never do project plans these days, really. It's because mostly people are doing agile stuff, right? Are you doing what's called a predictive style, or what some people call a waterfall sort of project management style project, which is what a Gantt chart kind of implies? The reality is I would say most projects now, definitely in the R&D space, are going to be a hybrid of agile and waterfall, right? And then if there's other things that other terminology that you don't know, I would suggest about, what does do some reading around what a good R&D project plan looks like, and you will find, you know, information on deliverables, what's a deliverable, what's a milestone, you know, that sort of stuff is really important. What does stakeholder engagement look like? All that sort of thing is outside of the scope of this conversation, but all really important, not only to score well, but actually to deliver a good piece of work that advances your business.
There's been a few questions around sort of like the funding sort of pots around at the moment. This one's probably more for Laura, but feel free to sort of jump in, David. Is there any opportunity at all for smaller business innovation grants going forward?
So innovation funding at the moment, so there are a number of funds live with Innovate UK. We, as a programme, support the majority of applications that we support are Innovate UK, and there are a number of funds coming and going. They always come and go with Innovate UK, and they tend to be live for about 3-4 weeks. In terms of keying into our support on the programme, if it's live and it's closing in a couple of weeks, it's unlikely as a programme we'll be able to support you in that process because of the onboarding and application process. So if you're interested in innovation funding, I would say reach out to us and we'll be able to talk to you in more detail about your area of innovation and application to the programme for support there. So you're on the programme ready for when these funding calls arise. And then also, as a programme, we advise businesses on the type of funding call that they should be going for, which come up as well, because there's often so many different areas of eligibility to each fund, and it can be a bit of a minefield when you're not used to looking at these types of funding calls day in, day out, like our team are. We're very happy to help advise there. So there's in short answer, yes, there's always different innovation funding pots coming up, but I would advise, if you're interested and based in the region, register to our programme, and we'll be able to talk through the suitability of those in more detail with you once we understand sort of what your area of innovation is.
So the next question is, how can grant funding support research and development? So I think this is a very specific one that's related to Tony's business, which is about, so we're developing a global payroll software platform that allows companies to run payroll for employees across multiple countries from a single system. As the platform grows, one of our key challenges is ensuring the technology is flexible and dynamic enough to support jurisdictions, regulatory requirements, and client-specific payroll structures. How could grant funding support us in research and developing the technology required to expand the platform to additional countries and regulatory environments?
So that's a very specific question, which I would say register for the program and reach out, so that you can discuss your needs. At a high level, what is it that you need help developing? Because what element of the technology do you need help with, and do you need a subsidy for? Because the reality is that, and what is the innovative technical risk to this? So if it's just it sounds quite like there's a lot of deployment challenges. So we've got different regulatory requirements in different countries, and there's a deployment risk. That's not really the same as technology risk. That's not like an innovation risk. So I would say if that's just a case of you need some help cranking the handle, that's not really what innovation funding is for. If you have got a completely unique approach to expanding internationally and you need some support to develop that innovative piece of technology that will do it really quickly, then that is something that might be worth getting funding for. But again, I would say to discuss the specifics of your requirement, your request, reach out to the programme.
Thanks, David. No, yeah, absolutely. We can pick that up separately. I think I'm just conscious of time. I think we've only got a couple of minutes left of the webinar session today. Thanks ever so much, Jade, for going through those questions with us. I think we'll start to conclude the webinar now for today. So no, thanks ever so much for joining us on this webinar. So we'll send out all the slides in the deck to you, and also the recording. If you'd like to give us some feedback on the session today, please see the QR code here. Also, we'll put the link to the QA to the feedback in the form into the Q&A bar and chat bar as well. Please do go through and sort of give us your thoughts about the session. It's always great to hear. We can then develop our further sessions accordingly to make sure they're really useful for you. Great to see you all today. Thanks ever so much for your time. And if you'd like to reach out to us with any further questions, please do. We've put our details in the chat bar and Q&A bar, but happy to speak to anybody that might be interested in the programme. But just lastly, thanks ever so much, David, for your time on the session today. Really valuable information. Great to hear everything from your talk today. And so, no, thank you ever so much, everybody. Have a good afternoon. Goodbye.